Welcome back, guys, to Regaining the Balance. Today I'm going to do a little riffing and reading and exploring about spirituality in terms of reincarnation in Christianity and kind of the concept of, or concepts of hell, so to speak. Because across the board, there are many different types of concepts, and I think it's important to kind of delve into this and take a look at those kinds of things so that we can understand a little bit more about some of the kind of hidden information that we're not privy to in our lives regarding spirituality and religion and all these other things. One of the main reasons I wanted to do this is because over the course of my long spiritual search and experience and everything else that goes along with that, I found that this is something that kept popping up over and over and over and over and over again. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that there was actually a early tradition in Christianity that included this. And what replaced it was basically something that is you got one life to live, and if you don't live it, then you're going to spend eternity in burning hellfire, which doesn't leave a whole lot of options for people. Anyways, let's get into it. So let me share the screen here, okay? And I will be able to, and there'll be a little bit of reading here and some talking in between. But it's, I'm going to try to line up some points for you guys, and then maybe, you guys make your own decisions. So here we go. So let's go and start off with this idea of fire worship for a minute, okay? I read to you guys the philosophy of fire, and which is here linked up, okay? And that's by a group of Rosicrucians who apparently wrote that. It's a very interesting book. If you guys want to read it, you can. I also did an audio book of this, so you can search it in the YouTube channel and find that. Otherwise, let's get into it real quick. So the worship or deification of fire is known in various religions, and that's all over the entire world. Okay, fire has been an important part of human culture since lower Paleolithic times. Yeah. Okay. We know that. So, in other words, Sanskrit here. They talk about fire, and they actually refer to fire in a very similar distinction that existed for water as well. Which is interesting because that pops up all the time. But the Sanskrit Agni, or the English ignite, from Latin ignis, and there you go, fire. And you see that in the Bible we have the burning bush, the pillar of fire, the flame of the menorah, the Pentecost, right? Of the New Testament and various other aspects. All over the place. You have it in Celtic mythology. What is it? Belenus, whose name is the Shining One. You have it in Slavic mythology. Svarog, meaning the bright and clear, was the spirit of fire. Okay. You have in the Vedic Hinduism, fire is a central element in the Vajna ceremony, with Agni, fire, playing the role as mediator between the worshiper and the other gods. So we have this theme that in ancient times, fire, as explained very clearly in the philosophy of fire here, fire was known as the celestial soul, so to speak, your spirit, or even the oversoul, the part of the illusion that we're all part of. Okay, and we're going to get into, I wanted to show you how this exists in different types of religions before we bring it back into Christianity, because it'll be important to kind of pay attention to the way that even scriptures and certain things refer to things like hell, for example. Okay, now you guys have all seen this, right? I'm sure you've seen this, the statue of Shiva sitting on top of the little dwarf thing here. Okay, and I'll have all these links for you guys if you guys want to just kind of go through and take a look. But I wanted to point this out because this is important. A lot of people make a big deal about this. I'm not sure why. When you start to really look at things, okay. And I do talk about dualism a lot because that's kind of the aspect of the illusion in of itself. And this is expressed in a lot of these motifs. So let me read here on the what is it called? The Nataraja. Yeah, Shiva Nataraja. The essential significance of Shiva's dance at Tilai, the traditional name of the Chidambaram, can be explained as first, it seems as the image of its rhythmic or musical play with its source of all movement within the universe. Okay, this is represented by circular or elliptical frame surrounding Shiva. And interestingly enough, in old astronomy, that's how they figured out the movement of the planets because don't go in full circles; they're elliptical in nature. So, secondly, the purpose of this dance is to release the souls of all men from the snare of illusion. Okay, that's a very important thing, and the illusion in and of itself is the ring of fire, and she is standing on the. She stands on the dwarf, or which signifies ignorance, more or less. And lastly, the place of the dance, which is portrayed as the center of the universe, is actually within the heart. Okay, and the Nataraja, states James Lochfield, symbolizes, quote, the connection between religion and the arts. It represents Shiva as the lord of dance, encompassing, quote, all creation, destruction, and all things in between. So here we have the idea of cycles, right? Which is repeated over and over and over again in so many different sources. But that's part of that. It's part of this whole thing. It's kind of like when you look at something like a fractal, and how it's the same thing over and over and over again in different cycles, but it's the same repeating type of thing. And that's a good way to represent that kind of thing. The Nataraja iconography incorporates contrasting elements, a fearless celebration of the joys of dance while being surrounded by fire, untouched by forces of ignorance and evil, signifying a spirituality that transcends all duality. Okay? So, keep that in mind. All right? And then, here we go again. Agni, the Hindu fire god. Okay, you have the Zoroastrians, who another use and symbolism fire is found in the Zoroastrianism. Contrary to popular belief in the West, Zoroastrians do not worship fire. Adherents of this faith, however, do believe that the elements, including fire, are pure. And that's another one of those things. They actually had fire temples. All right, so here we go here at the fire in Christianity, which I know many of you already know, but we'll go through it really quickly. And again, these are all allegorical to spirit or the soul of God, or, various other things. So keep that in mind. So the manifestation of the divine in the form of fire may be found in the Abrahamic faiths as well. Christianity, for example, the Holy Spirit is said to have descended on the apostles in the form of tongues of fire on the day of Pentecost, like I mentioned earlier. A manifestation of God and the elemental of fire is also found in the Old Testament, as evidenced in the passage in the book of Exodus, where God spoke to Moses from the burning bush, and then, of course, also followed them around, if you guys also remember. Now, this is interesting, and I really wanted to point this out because you have these opposing ideas of fire here with the Buddhists, but this is going to be central to one of my points a little bit later on in this video. So Buddha's view on the fire as suffering, okay? In some traditions, such as Buddhism, fire may be used to symbolically present something negative. In the Pali canon of Theravada Buddhism, there is a discourse known as I can't read that, Adilapariyaya Sutta, or the Fire Sermon. In this discourse, the Buddha said, quote, the mind is burning, ideas are burning, mind consciousness is burning, mind contact is burning. Whatever is felt as pleasant or painful, neither painful or pleasant, that arises with the mind contact for its indispensable condition. That too is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of lust, with the fire of hate, with the fire of delusion. I say it is burning with birth, aging, and death, with sorrows and lamentations, with pains and griefs and despairs. Therefore, fire in this context is symbolically regarded not as an enlightening element, but rather as one of roots of man's suffering. It is only by recognizing and extinguishing these symbolic fires that one may find liberation from suffering. Now, I think that there is a big point with this version of the Buddhist idea of it, because what happens is that this is taken by Western religions, as in like Christianity, and then it's sort of turned on its head, where Buddhism is talking about fire within people causing the problems within life. Christianity takes it and makes it into a place where you die in case you don't live right, kind of thing, with the same kind of ideas here. You know what I mean? I mean, look at this picture. This is pretty crazy. Kind of reminds you of lots of pictures of hell, right? But in my opinion, and I'll connect this a little bit later in the conclusions. This is going to be a big point about understanding reincarnation in terms of Christianity and the concept of hell. Okay, because all of this stuff comes from much older sources, as I've been slowly showing you guys bit by bit. So let's go to reincarnation on the Wikipedia page and see what they say. It's a philosophical or religious concept that the non-physical essence of a living being starts a new life in a different physical form or body after biological death. It is also called rebirth or transmigration. Important, important words there, especially the transmigration, because that comes up in many early Christian texts. So reincarnation is the central tenet of Indian religions, namely Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Hinduism. Although there are Hindu groups that do not believe in reincarnation, but believe in an afterlife, it is an esoteric belief in many streams of Orthodox Judaism and is found in different forms in some beliefs of North American natives. And some native Australians were most belief in the afterlife or spirit world. A belief in rebirth metapsychosis was held by Greek historical figures as Pythagoras, who was born in Sidon and is a Phoenician, or was, if he was even real, Socrates, and Plato. It is also believed in various modern religions, although the majority of denominations within Christianity and Islam do not believe that individuals incarnate. Particular groups within these religions do refer to reincarnation. These groups include the mainstream historical and contemporary followers of the Cathars, Alawites, and the Druze, and the Rosicrucians. And that is absolutely true, considering the book that I have open for you guys here, The Philosophy of Fire, is written by a Rosicrucian himself. And also, he wrote another book called The Rosicrucians and Their Teachings, and that goes absolutely into that over and over and over again. So if you guys are interested in reading those, I have videos, audiobook videos, whatever, in the channel. You can check those out, or you can download the book themselves in the description box of those videos and read them. So I'm going to skip down here a little bit here, because obviously Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism, it's a big part of their understanding and their religions. And let's see here, classic antiquity. Yep, see the Orphic religion, which comes from the Hermetic tradition, i.e. also the Phoenician tradition. There we go. Yet again, the school at Ulysses, which is very mystery schools at Ulysses, which is very interesting, because that's exactly in the Rosicrucian, in their teachings book, they talk very specifically about this school and this period and this mystery school. So they very much connect themselves with that. But you see, look at it. I mean, you see a lot of it: early Greece, classic antiquity, Celtic paganism, or what they call paganism, which is also a derivative of Old Phoenician, as we will look into in the future. Germanic paganism, Judaism, Taoism, all these. But I'm going to skip down here to the Christianity section, because we're going to get into some interesting stuff. But let me just set this up for us. So in the major Christian denominations, the concept of reincarnation is absent and is nowhere explicitly referred to in the Bible, not explicitly. However, the impossibility of a second early death is, okay, I'm not going to worry about that. Let's see here. I'm going to skip this part here and go down. The idea of reincarnation in the early church. There is evidence that Origen, a church father, one of the very earliest in early Christian times, taught reincarnation in his lifetime, but when his works were translated into Latin, these references were concealed. I wonder why. One of the epistles written by St. Jerome, and you have to remember that St. Jerome is the one who created the Latin Vulgate, okay? So he's suspect in our book, guys. To Avitus, the letter 124 ad Avitum Episcula, whatever number that is, which asserts that Origen's On First Principles was mistranscribed. I'm sure he would say that. So, about 10 years ago, that saintly man, Pamachius, sent me a copy of a certain person, Rufinus's rendering, or rather misrendering, of Origen's first principles, with a request that in Latin version I should give the true sense of the Greek, and should set down the writer's words for good or evil without bias in either direction. When I did as he wished and sent him the book, he was shocked to read it and looked up at in his desk, lest being circulated, it might wound the souls of many. Interesting. Under the impression that Origen was a heretic like Arius, and we are going to get into Arius, guys, because this Arius and this whole Arian thing in early Christianity was a major sticking point and a major schism that I was never taught in all the years in Christian schools. St. Jerome criticizes ideas described on first principles. St. Jerome writes about convincing proof, quote unquote, that Origen teaches reincarnation in the original version of his book. The following passage is a convincing proof that he holds the transmigration of the souls and annihilation of bodies. It can be shown that an incorporeal and reasonable being being has life in itself independently of the body, and that it is worse off in the body than out of it. Then, beyond a doubt, bodies are only of secondary importance and arise from time to time to meet the varying conditions of reasonable creatures. Those who require bodies are clothed with them, and contrariwise, when fallen souls have lifted themselves up to better things, their bodies are once more annihilated. They are thus ever vanquished and ever reappearing. Okay, and so, of course, Augustine of Hippo wrote in the City of God, and obviously completely rejected the entire belief of reincarnation, and that was essentially eliminated from the Christian Church. Okay, that's very important to understand that, because it was very much something that was debated among many people early on and crushed early on as well. And so, of Origen of Alexandria, also known as Origen Adamantius. He lived between 184 and 253. So interestingly, also during the time of Eusebius of Caesarea, and didn't live too far away from him, considering he lived in Alexandria here. Okay, and this is obviously before the. I think this is before the. Actually, I'm not sure, but this might be before the Alexandrian library was burned down. It might be after. I'd have to double check that. Because that might be interesting to see whether it burned down before or after this. Because the kind of stuff that he talks about here is very much heretical to the church today. However, he is actually considered one of the very first geniuses and theologians of the church, and very interestingly enough, not considered a saint. But all the people he did teach that became the church fathers of those early years ended up all becoming saints, except for him, which I found very interesting. So he became a catechist at the Catechetical School of Alexandria, devoted himself to studies, and adopted an ascetic lifestyle, and both vegetarian and he was sober. He did not drink at all or partake. Now, you guys can take a look at a lot of this stuff, because there's a lot of information about him, and they alleged that he has self-castrated himself, which I don't think is true whatsoever. But he definitely had some major conflicts, and he ended up being tortured at the end of his life, and succumbed from the wounds that he got from his torture. And it's, he's a very interesting individual, so I would definitely suggest checking his Wikipedia page out, or other books if you guys find other things. So, I mean, it's very interesting. He's got a very interesting background here. And a lot of his ideas, were sort of the basis for early Christianity, but then they took other things and they threw it out. Now, as an example, I have here this is a transcription from this guy's lecture here. Okay, I put both in the description box if you guys want to look at it. I first read the transcription, and then, as you can see, I'm only 10 minutes into the video, but I figured I'd check it out and see, because I like to see, how people express themselves as they're giving ideas. It's kind of, it's nice, or hear them for that matter. But this is what he wrote about Origen. Okay, and this is about flesh and fire, right, guys? Reincarnation and universal salvation in the early church. All right. So, um, certain that every detail and difference in the scriptures is significant, Origen insisted that these two verbs and these two stories tell of us two distinct creations. So he's talking about the creation stories in the Bible. Origen says that God first made us minds. The Greek word for minds is nous, but in Greek this word is not so much a faculty of cognition as we think of mind as it is a faculty of contemplation, intuition, and receptivity. Isn't that interesting? Origen equates the mind with the spirit, pneuma, the highest elements in the tripartite division of spirit, soul, and body. Oh, and also he was very instrumental in the creation and understanding of the Trinity, for example. For Origen, the whole sole purpose of the original mind spirits was to contemplate their creator. Something distracted them, however, some movement within themselves, some force eating away at their powers of attention. All of them, except one, turned away from God to varying degrees, and God formed these fallen minds into angels, humans, and demons, depending on the degree of their distraction. I wouldn't take demons and angels as being literal here. Around them all he formed a world. Around them all he formed a world in which to house them, to heal them, to restore them. If we were once God's own poems, we have now become like living plastics, stiff and rigid and enduring over many lifetimes. So we were first made as minds, and as minds we were made in the image of God, imago Dei. And since, as the scripture tells us, quote, God is a consuming fire, unquote, in Deuteronomy 4:24, 9:3, and Hebrews 12:29, minds were made in this image of this fire. Are you guys seeing the motif here? Okay. Not just in Christianity, but in all the other different religions which stemmed to the West and gave all these different religions their bases and their ideas. Okay, so the God is a consuming fire. In fact, they were made to be like irons in the great. This is kind of interesting analogy, and think about this for a second. Minds were made in this image of this fire. In fact, they were made to be like irons in the great fire of God. As long as they were plunged into the fire, they were aflame. But just like irons, when they are removed from God's fire, they cooled and became ever more solid and slow. This cooling is our mythological descent into souls and bodies, the fall into the flesh. For Origen, all this is by God's design. Our fall into flesh is in fact our opportunity for rehabilitation. The original fiery mind moved quickly, too quickly, and so it was easily distracted. The descent into this world slows the mind down, now encumbered by a soul and a body, and trains it over many, many lifetimes to pay steadier attention. Whenever we successfully pay steady attention to anything, this or that, we inch closer to contemplation and we blaze just a little brighter. Okay? This rehabilitation, by the way, is something we share with our sibling minds, as in all of you guys, and all of us across the entire expanse, time and space. Okay? The angels and demons, which is us still, they too were fiery minds. They too have fallen. Angels help us along the way, and demons hinder us. That's just kind of expressing the duality of human nature as souls, okay, in this divine circular fire, as we saw Shiva being surrounded by. And just like siblings, I've got 6 of them, so I know. This guy, not me. The transformation from flesh to fire must be free, Origen thought, and thus it will take a long, long time, many, many lifetimes, and perhaps successive worlds in order for God to be all in all, as the Apostle Paul promises. Origen insisted that all the fallen minds must eventually be restored. He believed the Apostle Peter foretold of this when he spoke in the Acts of the Apostles 3:21 of a, quote, restoration of all things, unquote. Origen took Peter at his word, all things, all the fallen, all minds, Origen took Peter at his word, all things, all the fallen minds, including Satan, must be restored. In other words, he insisted on universal salvation, but worked out across many lifetimes and successive worlds. In other words, reincarnation. In the end, metastasis, which is reincarnation in Greek, I guess. The last to be saved will be Satan. Satan, quote unquote, is simply the name we give to the mind that fell furthest, and the mind most stubbornly entrenched in sin and ignorance. So, not everyone in his day or since has appreciated Origen's insistence on universal salvation, that God will not cease until all the fallen minds are gathered once again around the Creator. If pressed, Origen will eventually even acknowledge that, strictly speaking, quote unquote, Satan will never be saved, because by the time the fallen mind we now call Satan is slowly and painfully rehabilitated and will no longer bear the name Satan, it is fully restored, that soul, like any other, will bear the name Christ. Clever as it is, this move has never seemed to satisfy those critics who are certain that God intends eternal torment for the damned. And I think that right there is an absolutely beautiful point here, okay? Because this is the big difference right here, guys, okay? You have the story that we're told since we're tiny, that you have one life to live, and if you screw up in any amount, which is going to be, I guess, judged over by God, and if you're going by the Old Testament God, then, be careful, because as I showed you in one of these other videos, like the list of all the different things that God tells the Israelites to do, he kind of seems psychopathic in a lot of ways, right? But it doesn't really give you this idea that there is a rehabilitation of your soul. What is your purpose in life? If it's just to sit here and constantly be at each other's throats, survival of the fittest, which is just an absolutely horrible mantra that should be completely disregarded and buried into the sands of time forever, because it's horrible. It's done. That whole idea has done such a number on society across the world, and it's really disgusting, in my opinion. So that'll be, again, I'm going to link all this stuff up here. I would definitely suggest reading this or listening to it, because this gentleman has some really great points. And what's funny is that I came up with the same exact idea, just going through my own process of spiritual searching and experience and all that other stuff. And I was glad to see that somebody of obviously an educated individual like this gentleman here put together something like this, which is really very illuminating and shows you kind of some of the very important things in early Christianity and how it taught this kind of stuff, and then soon got completely buried in the sands of time, so to speak, because what would you want? You want the church itself to control people, because they're the only ones with the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here, and it's kind of a shame that that we have that version of it, because the other version seems like it seems a little bit less harsh in that way, So if you guys want to check out, just listen to it. The descriptor or the connection is in the sorry, the link is in the description box. So now I'm going to skip over here to Mr. Edgar Cayce. And if you guys know Edgar Cayce, he's called the Sleeping Prophet, and him and his entire family lived in close to the Virginia Beach area. They were all devout Christians, all of them, and it was very mysterious for them when they've discovered his kind of ability to be able to give medical cures and things like that to people who were asking, and various other things, predictions, all kinds of different stuff. Anyways, there's just a library of information that's come out of him and all the different readings he's done. But let me read you a little bit. There's 2 pages of this I'm going to read to give you a little bit more on the reincarnation thing, because this gentleman, again, was a devout Christian. He wrote, let's read. In 1901, at the age of 24, Edgar Cayce gave one of his first readings on himself, diagnosing a health condition. But it wouldn't be until 1923 that the subject of reincarnation would be explored in a reading given to a printer from Ohio. It was during a set of philosophical questions that Cayce first began to talk about reincarnation. Eventually, this led to an early new way of using Cayce's ability that came to be known as quote-unquote life readings. The subject was examined in extensive detail and would become the second major topic examined by the sleeping Cayce. Interestingly enough, while the concept was mentioned in a prior reading given as early as 1911, but no one among Cayce's associates was familiar with the idea, and the reference wasn't recognized as such for decades. The concept of reincarnation shocked and challenged Edgar Cayce and his family. They were deeply religious people doing this work to help others because that's what their Christian faith taught them or taught. Reincarnation was not part of their reality, yet the healings and the help continued to come, so the Cayce family continued with the physical material, but cautiously reflected on the strange philosophical material. Ultimately, the Cayces began to accept the ideas, though not as reincarnation per se. Edgar Cayce preferred to call it the continuity of life, quote unquote. As a child, he began to read the Bible from front to back and did so for every year of his life. So there you go, just so you can get an idea of how much of a Christian this gentleman was. He felt that it did not contain much evidence that life, the true life in the spirit, is. He felt that it did contain much evidence that life, the true life in the spirit, is continual. Reincarnation is the belief that, is the belief that each of us goes through a series of lifetimes for the purpose of spiritual growth and spiritual development. The past merely provides a framework of potentials and possibilities. Sounds just like quantum physics, doesn't it, guys? And an individual's choices, actions, and free will in the present determines the actual experience lived this time around. Rather than being a fatalistic approach to life, it is much more one of the nearly limitless opportunities within this framework of lessons that need to be learned as the soul strives to meet itself in the central idea that the soul is constantly experiencing the consequences of its previous choices. The concept is expressed in biblical terminology as, quote, what you sow, you must reap, unquote, and is generally labeled like attracts like by the students of reincarnation. Another key idea from the readings is the idea of karma. The word karma is a Sanskrit term that means work, deed, or act. It has also been interpreted to mean cause and effect. Although the readings definitely agree with this concept, perhaps one of their most intriguing and unique philosophical contributions is the idea that karma can simply be defined as memory. It is a pool of information that the subconscious mind draws upon and can utilize in the present. It has elements that are positive as well as those which seem negative, for, again, duality, right? For example, an immediate affinity toward an individual is likely a karmic as an immediate animosity towards someone else. To be sure, this subconscious memory has an effect and influence on how we think, how we react, what we choose, and even how we look, but the component of free will is ever within our grasp. Reincarnation is a concept that encompasses not only Eastern thought, but also all of the major religions of the world. Exactly, guys. Exactly. This is a concept that we can allow us to have more compassion one for another. Yes, it's a way we can begin to look at all facets of life purposefully. This is exactly my point. However, it doesn't really matter if another individual believes or doubts the theory of rebirth. For some, it can be a helpful concept, for others, confusing. Indeed. And I hope to break some of that confusion down. The reason for believing in reincarnation is not so that we can dwell upon the past or brag about the possibility of being someone famous in the past. The wisest student of reincarnation knows that we have all had incarnations in lowly and lofty circumstances. Instead, the purpose is summed up in one of Cayce's readings. And quoting the reading, in the studies then we know where ye are going, and to find that ye only lived, died, and were buried under the cherry tree in grandmother's garden does not make thee one whit better neighbor, citizen, mother, or father. But to know that ye spoke unkindly and suffered for it, and in the present may correct it by being righteous, that is worthwhile. Okay? And I could not agree with that anymore. Okay? I really can't. And I just want to point out that when they talk about things like the fire itself, like this gentleman here, and the flesh and the fire. Okay, let's bring this back a little bit here as this concept here in Psychology of Religions East and West, which I did a 2-hour reading of this particular lecture that Carl Jung did. It's very interesting because it talks about the quaternity, okay, which is the fourfold cross, right? Which is supposed to represent the Trinity. But the thing is, and the problem with the early church was that in order to the quaternity would include the concept of, again, going back to, let's go back to this here. The idea, the origin that Origen talks about is about how in the end Satan then will eventually be, his soul also be restored, and eventually will be known as Christ, and then all things will come back to God in and of itself. And so the idea of the quaternity is that idea, and it's the removal of that idea that caused so much, like, ideological strife within Christianity, because it also takes away the idea of the duality within reincarnation, because that's part of it all. And you take away the demiurge type of devil or God version or whatever else, whatever you want to call it, which I've gone through in the past. And you realize that, like, when they made things into the Trinity, even though they used the sign of the cross is a sign of quaternity, so it's four, right, not three. And by eliminating one and making him this mythological being that torments you in the fires of hell, they then are able to put into place these ideas, which essentially do nothing but put fear into people's minds and hearts for their entire lives. And I think that's wrong, myself. And just as another example on this idea of fire and this idea of reincarnation in Christianity, let's look really quickly. Okay, so this is again the Aramaic version of the Bible. I'm gonna refer to this one a lot because I feel like, especially after reading the final words of Jesus in the Aramaic versus the version that we get in our Bible, that you might want to go back to this and compare, your Bible to what this says, because the Bible is the whole thing with the my God, why have you forsaken me, is not at all what it is said in Aramaic whatsoever. And I did go through that in a different video. And essentially, he says in Aramaic, my God, for this I was kept, or for this is the reason I was born. That's a very different thing than why have you forsaken me, and then makes more sense when he says at the end, it is finished. So just to give you an idea, translations make a huge difference, especially that the very last words of Jesus on the cross, they can't even get that right. I mean, give me a break. That should tell you a lot about the scribes and how you have to look in between the lines of things, okay? And that's what we're going to do right now, okay? So we just went through a bunch of the various ideas of reincarnation, okay, through Edgar Cayce, through Hinduism, through Buddhism, and all these other things, and we got a little bit of Origen's view on it, okay, which I think is much closer to the truth than the rest of the church would actually have you believe. But let's read Matthew chapter 25, starting at verse 34, okay? And this is talking about, like, those who live righteous lives and those who don't live righteous lives. When, the righteous will be bring to the right, the ones will be bring to the left, the unrighteous, quote unquote. Okay, so hear me out here. We'll read a couple of these lines, and then I'll come back to it and make a comment. Then the king will say to those at his right, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom which has been prepared for you from the foundation of the world, which is inside of you, of course. For I was hungry, and you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you covered me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will say to him, our Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and took you in, or that you were naked and cover you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? The king then will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, inasmuch as you have done to one of these least brethren, you did it to me. Okay? Then he will also say to those that is left, go away from me, you cursed, to the everlasting fire, that which is prepared for the adversary and his angels. For I was hungry, and you did not give me to eat. I was thirsty, and you did not give me to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. I was naked, and you did not cover me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer and say, O Lord, when did we see you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you? And then he will answer and say to them, Truly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do to one of these least ones, you also did not unto me. Do not do it to me. And these shall go into everlasting torment, and the righteousness into eternal life. Now, interestingly, okay, he says everlasting torment, and this is everlasting fire. Okay? All right, so there we go, guys. If you're reading between the lines here, and what you just read from Edgar Cayce and also from Origen here, okay, but specifically this right here, this quote that he has at the end here, okay. But to know that ye spoke unkindly and suffered for it, and in the present may correct it by being righteous, that is worthwhile. Okay, think about this concept for half a second and realize that this idea in this gospel is essentially telling you that the people that you interact with every day are Christ's, and that they are part of yourself. This is the whole idea of this, like, this divinity that you see in other religions as well. And when you treat someone well, or you do a good thing for them, or whatever else, you're doing it not just for Christ, but you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the better of the humanity in a much broader sense of spirituality. Okay, and this idea of being, go away from me, you cursed, to the everlasting fire. Well, doesn't that sound interesting? Okay, because let's go right back here, okay, to this Buddhist views on fire as suffering, okay? Now, let's take this idea of the everlasting fire and the idea of hell, okay, this everlasting whatever else, that, or you're going to be constantly in torment and all that other stuff. Well, let me ask, I'll just ask an open-ended question, just for you guys to think for yourselves. Not looking for answers from you or anything like that. Just throwing in a question out there for your own contemplation. Why can't we view the illusion of this world that we are a part of as a place of suffering? I.e., this is the quote-unquote hell that is spoken of. The constant reincarnation and having to suffer over and over and over and over again in lives and deal with these things. And the big problem with our current situation, and which has been going on for, I don't know, a minimum of 500 years, is that they've eliminated this whole idea from the Christian world, so to speak. And I'm going to show you how very much that's connected with the times of the 500s or the 1500s, and how everything changed around that period of time and right before then, because they really had to eliminate these ideas from society, because it created societies that were peaceful and that didn't go along with the various people who use these kinds of ancient knowledges to control and enslave people, right? The quote-unquote philosopher's stone, which is not an actual stone, but an idea that you can create. You can create ideas and get people to create gold, quote-unquote, for you, to create riches, to basically enslave themselves. And what is that? Let me just double check something here. Yeah, we're good. Okay. And so here we go. The Buddhist version of suffering is all within life itself, right? Now you have the idea of hell, which is everlasting torment and fire. How interesting how they are basically a description of each other. But one is in one realm and the other is in another realm. Now, the fire and brimstone of hell, as in what we understand in Christianity, that is one that I kind of reject. And because I rejected it a long time ago, I've actually been able to live a much, I don't know, the fear of death and fear of things is way lessened in my own life. Big time. I used to think about it. Things used to, whatever. But it almost gives you more anxiety than it does anything else. Whereas this idea in Christianity of reincarnation and going back to God is something that is a heck of a lot more attractive and makes a heck of a lot more sense. Because again, you have no idea the kind of things you can do for somebody that will send them in a different direction. The things you can say to them, a kind gesture given to somebody, and we're in our researches into the therapeutae and things like that, which are very interesting, and we'll be doing more on them. You see the same kind of ideas. So, and here's another element to the reincarnative part of this. And I'm not going to get too much into this, but I have the link in the description box if you guys want to read this. But the quote unquote book of life, which Cayce calls the Akashic records, can be equated to the universe's supercomputer system. It is this system that acts as the central storehouse of all information for every individual who ever lived upon the earth. More than just a reservoir of events, the Akashic records contain every deed, word, feeling, thought, and intent that has ever occurred in any time in history of the world. Much more than a simple memory storehouse. However, these Akashic records are interactive in that they have a tremendous influence upon our everyday lives, our relationships, our feelings and beliefs, and the potential realities we draw towards us. Okay? And any of you guys who are kind of new to the idea of reincarnation, you should definitely check out, and I have this in the description box, but either get the book Journey of Souls or listen to the audiobook, because you're going to learn a lot about this kind of system. And when you compare this book to Edgar Cayce's readings and the Akashic records and all that, I mean, it's like right up against each other, like they are talking about the same things. And as you probably could imagine, if you start to look at other older religious writings, then you will see very similar aspects of this. But what's really interesting about this book and the guy who wrote it is that he was not a person of spiritual background. As a matter of fact, he absolutely kind of rejected the whole thing, became a psychotherapist, and used hypnosis as a way of helping his patients. And then one day, he did something unexpected, and he passed the space between when someone was born and between when they died again. And that kind of changed his life in a lot of ways and made him very interested in the subject. So I would definitely, if you've never listened or read this book, I would definitely give it a try. I have both parts. This is part 2. Part 1 is also in the description box. You'll get used to an audible book, so again, you'll get used to the audio part of it. But this is a fascinating read, you guys. And what I was just talking about here, and the concepts of reincarnation and understanding that, like, the purpose of life is to treat each other in, the way we should be treating each other. Excuse me. And this is not a new concept in any kind of way, shape, or form. No matter how many times somebody wants to call it a new age type of thing, okay? So check that out, because there's a wealth of information on here. And you're going to, pick up little other things too. But there is a story about this woman in, I think it's the first book, or the first part, where she goes to him because she has these neck problems and no doctor can figure it out. And he ends up doing a past life regression type of thing to see what happened to her in her last life. And she was in the Wild West and was attacked by some native tribe, and she got shot in the throat with an arrow. And after dealing with that on a psychological, spiritual basis, she wrote to him quite a bit later, and you'll see this in the book, or hear it in the book, that her throat aches have completely disappeared. And so kind of brings the question about also the kind of people who cut their limbs off because they don't think they should be there. Or maybe sometimes people who feel that they're more comfortable as being a woman or a man, or a man or a woman, because they've lived many, many, many lives as one or the other. And the transition isn't an easy one, apparently, as you will see reading this book, or listening to it. And there's, believe what you will, guys, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in this, and this is like a conglomeration of thousands and thousands of hypnotizing its patients. And what's interesting as well is if you search in YouTube, Past life regression, sleep hypnosis, live. Well, I don't. Yeah, there are some. Yeah, there's quite a bit of it. I mean, this isn't probably a. I shouldn't probably put live on here. Anyways, you can find a bunch of different people who do these things, and they film them. And the thing is that a lot of them are 4 hours long. So you should, because as he says in his book, A Journey of Souls here, as he says in his book, it takes such a long time to get to that point because you're slowly going back through somebody's entire life and then crossing into it. And you'll notice a lot of people will be like, oh, well, they're just leading them on. Actually, if you pay attention, a lot of the questions that are used are open-ended questions because those are the only ones that work. So yeah, I mean, and so going over here to the Ouroboros, okay, in the same, in just kind of dealing in the same kind of ideas here as in reincarnation, okay, because this whole snake eating the tail, the dragon eating the tail, this is what it really is a symbol of. So let's just take a quick look at this, okay. Let's see here. It is an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or a dragon eating its own tail. Originating in ancient Egypt iconography, I'm sure, who knows, that may have originated somewhere else. The Ouroboros entered Western traditions via Greek magical tradition, which probably would be actually Phoenician, considering the magical tradition usually is referred to as Pythagorean or Kabiri, and was adopted as a symbol in Gnosticism and Hermeticism, yet again, look at that, and notably in alchemy. And the terms derived from ancient Greek. I'm not going to read that part, I don't care. So, you guys can look through this. The symbolisms are sort of all over the place, but they essentially are here a symbol of birth, death, and rebirth. The Ouroboros symbol is a common sight in 17th and 18th century gravestones, varying from region to region. Some having legs and even a torso, some like bodies, others carved in braces like a circle. They appear alongside the hourglass, skulls, Bible, cherubs that are so common in depictions of mortality in this era. And any of you guys who pay attention to that kind of stuff will know that is true. And like those other symbols, they disappeared from gravestones in the 19th century Gothic revival. What an interesting word, Gothic revival. We're going to get into the Gothic thing, guys. That's going to be a huge clue. So, very interestingly enough, though, let's read a little bit of this. The famous Ouroboros drawing of the early alchemical text, the Chrysopia of Cleopatra, notably originally dating to the 3rd century of Alexandria, but first known in a 10th century copy, encloses the words to have hen to pan, the all is one. Its black and white halves may represent a Gnostic duality of existence, obviously, analogous to the Taoist yin and the yang symbol. The Chrysopia Ouroboros of Cleopatra, the alchemist, is one of the oldest images of the Ouroboros to be linked with the legendary opus of alchemists, the Philosopher's Stone. And I just mentioned that. Let's see here. Okay, so in Gnosticism, a serpent biting its tail symbolizes eternity and the soul of the world. In Gnostic Pistis Sophia, 400 AD, describes the Ouroboros as a 12-part dragon surrounded the world with its tail in its mouth. The 15th century alchemical manuscript, the Aura Consorgens, features the Ouroboros where it is used amongst symbols of the sun, moon, and Mercury. So bringing it back to the Thoth and the Egyptians and all that kind of stuff, right? In Norse mythology, see, this is all going to come together real soon. The Ouroboros appears as the serpent. Okay, I'm going to try and do this word, guys. Jormungandr, one of the 3 children of Loki and Angrobada. Okay. Sorry, which grew so large that it could encircle the world and grasp its tail in its teeth. In the legends of Ragnar Lothbrok, okay. And it is common. I'm not going to read that part about Lothbrok. Let's see here. Oh, yeah. And it is common belief among indigenous people of the tropical lowlands of South America that waters at the edge of the world disc are encircled by a snake, often an anaconda biting its own temple, or sorry, its own tail. So, the Ouroboros here, very interesting connection because it definitely has this idea. And here in the ancient part of it, it is all about this whole idea of reincarnation yet again and rebirth, right? Osiris, born again as Ra. Both serpents are manifested of the deity Mihan, who in other funerary texts protects Ra in the underworld. The whole divine figure represents the beginning and the end of time, okay? And so one of the things that's interesting about the snake uh, idea is that it's used in both ways. Just like the fire of the Naharata, the snake biting its own tail, is also representative of the fire, right? But it's also represented within the idea that it sheds its skin and becomes stronger and bigger, and each time it does that, it goes from old to new again. Okay, so there's a double meaning here. And if we go back to the ancient fragments of the Phoenician Sencho Neothon, he writes of the serpent. The Tautus Thoth Hermes first consecrated the basilisk and introduced the worship of the serpent tribe, in which he was followed by the Phoenicians and Egyptians. For this animal was held to him to be the most inspirited of all the reptiles and of a fiery nature. Look at that, guys. Inasmuch as it exhibits an incredible celerity, moving by its spirits without either hands or feet or any of those external organs by which other animals affect their motion. And it is in this progress and in its progress, it assumes a variety of forms, moving in spiral course, and at what degree of swiftness it pleases. And it is very long lived and has the quality not only of putting off its old age and assuming a second youth, but it receives a greater increase. And when it has fulfilled the appointed measure of its existence, it consumes itself, as Tacitus has laid down in the sacred books, wherefore this animal is introduced in the sacred rites and mysteries. And so the idea of consuming itself brings it all the way back, guys, to this idea that this gentleman talks about here of eventually Satan is that part of us that fell furthest away from God and becomes rehabilitated, and then all of these supposed separation from God becomes non-existent. The snake eating its own tail, the quote disappearance of the universe, so to speak. And that's an important idea behind all of this kind of stuff because that's kind of what they're talking about. That's an allegorical. This book here, this part here it's obviously allegory, but it's telling you that you shed your body, and you either become greater or you don't become greater. But it's the when it's fulfilled the appointed measure of its existence, i.e., you'll become more as Christ, so to speak. Then there is no reason to constantly be reincarnated. Another thing I would like to say too is that it mentions about, at least Edgar Cayce talks about being born into different worlds, and so does Origen, if I'm not mistaken. But so does this book. Okay, talks about that as well, and it goes into some detail, not a ton, but it does go into some detail. And so it's very fascinating that we have all these different kinds of connections here, guys, and I wouldn't say that that's by mistake, because in the end, we there are elements of Christianity that were, and not just small elements of Christianity, but big elements of Christianity that really believed in this as part of the theology. And every one of those areas that these traditions grew out of were completely destroyed. All the people were either all murdered or they were taken over by a completely different group of people or whatever else. I mean, I'll be going into this in the near future because it is definitely part of the study. It's definitely going to be part of the study of our future videos into history, because the reality is that you cannot separate the history of the world, and and the history of religions at the same time. I mean, they are one and the same. And when I start to lay some of this out, like it's going to be really obvious, at least to some people. I think, I hope, because what we're going to do is we're going to get into things like the Holy Roman Empire, quote unquote, and who they were and why they called themselves that, and that they were neither holy, Roman, or an empire, and the real power players in Europe that really became the dominating power within Christianity and the papacy and all that kind of stuff, and how they crushed the other side of the early Christianity and did it in a very brutal way and continue to do it all the way through the 1600s and whatnot. And it sort of delivered us what we have today. And one of the things that's interesting is that you have, in a lot of old depictions, you have things like the faceless knight, which is always in a classical Roman kind of army outfit, right? But that what in my opinion it represents is the soullessness of these people who are pushing this idea of materialism across the world through all their various arms and branches and whatnot, and we'll get into that in the future. But I think that this was I didn't mean to go for an hour long, but there was a lot to go through, and the thing is just as a kind of final recap, we have an understanding that fire worship, which is all over the world. I haven't showed you all the Native Americans and all these other things. Maybe I'll get into that in a different video. But fire worship is used all over the world. It's also used as an expression of God or spirit all over the world in all kinds of religions. Okay, and we looked at the Hindu version on use of fire and the understanding of it a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. I showed you the famous dancing Shiva and the ringing fire, standing on ignorance and the illusion, right? Because that's the big thing about it right here. Secondly, the purpose of its dance is to release the souls of man from the snare of illusion, right? And ignorance. We looked at Buddhist version of the fire as suffering, and we made a comparison with the Christian version of hell, and how they're very much kind of the same ideas, but one's flipped on the other, right? And then going in through reincarnation and understanding it through one of the church's earliest fathers and earliest theologians. I think probably one of the earliest theologians. You see him, going through these ideas of reincarnation in theology, in early theology. And remember, these guys had texts that we will never see the light of day. We'll never see these things, but they obviously were part of a much older tradition. And I think this gentleman here in his lecture was excellent and really shows you a very good example of reincarnation in Christianity. So I think if you guys want to watch it or read it, all the links are in the description box. Edgar Cayce's stuff, all in the Journey of Souls thing, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so make up your own mind, you guys. This is obviously something that you will have to obviously kind of look over, but there's a lot of information here, and there's a lot, and it's not And this is just like one quick video I put together. I got a lot more that I could show that really shows you the various aspects of religions and this idea of hell and this idea of a devil and all these other things. Like when you start to look into it and you realize there is no hell and that hell is just the expression of the suffering, like the Buddhists talk about, that I showed earlier, that life is this burning, it's the suffering, it's all these things, and that what if this idea of hell is essentially the idea of reincarnation? Why would you have to keep coming back here to suffer over and over again if you learned your lesson? But if you're not even taught that that is an aspect of your life and that you can actually spend every day kind of understanding that, like the closer you get spiritually to yourself, so know thyself, makes a big difference, because once you understand that you're the spirituality within yourself, you can start to see the lessons play itself out in front of you in life, and your friends and your family and your coworkers and random people who scream at you because they cut you off or you cut them off in traffic or something like that. There's a million examples, and every single day, if you stop and think about it, you have a million of your own examples. So, hopefully people can open their minds up a little bit to this, because that's a really important distinctions here. And what if there really is no hell, guys? What would that do to the society if they realize there's no burning hell to do this, but the things that you do in life are going to create a sort of hellish suffering in your next life if you're not careful. And that, in my opinion, teaches people something in life. It teaches you how to look at people differently. And that is extremely different than what we have been delivered by this materialistic, quote unquote, Darwinian idea of all things are just part of a machine and there is nothing else but that idea, which is really just done. It's really done a number on society. And just look at the way we all just look at the way, just turn on the news. I mean, look at media, look at the movies, look at all these things. They're all just telling you the same kind of shit. And, oh, excuse my French. And you know what? I have rejected that a long time ago and realized in my own heart that hell really isn't, it doesn't exist. And, and, and yeah, we have, someone in my chat says, "Hell is what you go through. Heaven is what you make it." And I gotta say, buddy, I do appreciate that, because I agree with that. And and yes, Seeking Truth says most people already don't believe in hell. They don't believe in anything spiritual, and yeah, that's true. And that's also part of the turnaround, right? If you make everything materialistic, then that's your God essentially, which is why we see the cult of money being the real religion of the quote unquote elites, because they can't control people who aren't going to fold themselves into this guilt-ridden system of ideas, and they never will be able to. And so in the past they just murdered a lot of people. Nowadays they use their big arms of media in order to convince you that you're just nothing but a big meat sack walking around and everything is by chance. And if you want anything in life, then you better fight for it, because your neighbor and your brother is going to want it too. And that's the opposite to what everything I just talked about. The absolutely complete opposite. And you see what one ideology has done to societies across the world. And it would be nice to see what the other ideology would do if more people were woken up to the ideas that, maybe this is actually the truth. And Christians, I think, would do well to do that, because the worst part about in growing up as Catholic and all this other stuff, it's this very just rigid idea. And if you don't believe it, then you're just gonna go to hell, or you're, you know what I mean? Like, it's this absolutely, if you don't do it, what is it, the expression, damned if you do, damned if you don't, you know what I mean? So, I don't know. It's, yes, indeed, saboteurs have invaded everything, and I agree with that. But it's, what, it all comes down to your mind, right? It is a fight for your mind, and it always has been. And the thing is that if people spend a little bit more time in retrospection and in contemplation, then I think people would realize more of these kind of things. And it's one of those things where, even though we might be an insignificant piece of dust in the massive universe, we're still part of that universe. And whatever that universe may or may not actually be in reality, who knows? Maybe one day we'll find out. But in the meantime, let's treat each other nice, and frankly, if we took the time to realize the little lessons that we have every single day of our lives, then you know what? I can tell you now that practicing those things will bring much peace to many people, and that's what people want. They're tired of being stressed out. They're tired of having to run again or to swim against the current. You know what I mean? And the reality is that we can all change the current ourselves. We don't have to go with what these people are doing. We don't have to play along with all these things. And I'm glad that you don't believe that, Seeking Truth. But that's true, though. A lot of people do say things like that, don't they? We are an insignificant piece of dust in the massive universe, which basically is something that just reduces us, again, to that mechanistic idea. So I'm glad that you put that you were being sarcastic in that. Because it's true. And I think that's part of the thing we all have to really be careful on. And hopefully I was able to share some stuff with you guys that illuminated some of the Christian background between the ideas of reincarnation, that they were actually a thing back in the day. And we will be getting into the subject of the Cathars very soon, because these people, and the story of their persecution and their executions, I should say, is integral to the key of when history changed and when all these ideas basically were destroyed and wiped off the face of Western theology for a while. Let's just say a lot of these people went into hiding, and they, held their own little beliefs. They held their old beliefs with them, and in time, were able to go to different places and things like that. Oh, it was one thing I wanted to share with you guys really quickly, because this is something important, I think. And let me just share the screen again here and get the right. There we go. Okay. So let me share the screen. One of the things I thought that was terribly interesting here. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, nope. I'd have to go back and look through this again. I apologize. But yeah, I mean, the Cathars, they're a fascinating group of people. And interestingly enough, guys, take a look at this. So the Cathar cross here, and then we have our Aramaic Bible, okay? And take a look at this. Isn't that interesting, right? Cathar cross, Aramaic Bible cross. They're very similar here. Makes you wonder whether, one was taken from the other. But anyways, I think that's good enough for today. It was an hour. But we will be looking into the Cathars, Catharism, things like that, and sort of their connection with the older Christianity and Arianism, and how that was really one of the biggest schisms within the church. And then when I squashed the timelines together from the 1500s to the 500s, I hopefully you guys will see the absolutely, like, there's some amazingly interesting connecting points between what was happening in those periods of time versus what's happening in the 1500s. And it's almost like they're the same thing. They just renamed something in one of those eras into something else. But it has always been a fight for the soul of Christianity and the ideas of it, because one is one of control and the other was one of true freedom. And that's what I'm trying to get at with some of these videos on spirituality, is to show that, and not just through spiritual ideas, but also through history and the persecution and the elimination of these different people. Because this is a very fascinating story, but like I said, you can't separate one without the other. So if you guys like the video, please hit the like button. Share if you think other people would be interested in this kind of different aspect of Christianity. And please subscribe if you haven't done already, and hit the all button if you want to get all the different notifications of our videos. Otherwise, thank you so very much, guys, for staying and listening today, and much love to all of you. And be good to each other, because that's really the reason we're all here anyways. So let's learn and do something good. Okay? Love you guys. Bye.